You ever notice how trouble shows up quiet, no sirens, no warning, just a letter taped to your door like it owns the place? Because that's exactly how it started for Eleanor May Watkins, 74 years old, widowed, living alone in the same damn house shed called home. Since Nixon was in office, a little white ranch-style place in Cedar Grove, Arizona. Nothing fancy, just clean, neat hedges, American flag on the porch, wind chimes singing soft every afternoon. This was the house her husband Frank bought back in 1973, back when interest rates were wild and dreams were cheap. Frank worked construction, hands always cracked, back always sore, but he paid that mortgage every single month. Frank passed 12 years ago. Heart gave out one quiet morning just like that, and ever since then Eleanor had been surviving, not living, making do, stretching Social Security, keeping the lights on, keeping the memories alive. She didn't bother nobody, didn't throw parties, didn't blast music, didn't even park crooked. Hell, half the neighborhood barely noticed she was still breathing until the HOA noticed her house. The Cedar Grove Homeowners Association. 3 words that sound harmless until they ain't. See, Cedar Grove wasn't always one of those tight leash neighborhoods. Back in the day, it was just families, kids riding bikes, dogs barking, people minding their business. Then new folks moved in, younger, sharper suit types, rule lovers, and the HOA went from simple maintenance fees to full-blown neighborhood dictatorship. New bylaws, new fines, new inspections, new board members with way too much time and power. Eleanor didn't keep up with all that. Why would she? Her dues were paid, her lawn was cut, her house was quiet. She thought she was safe. That first letter showed up on a Tuesday. Bright white envelope, HOA logo stamped like a badge. She opened it, slow, hands shaking a little, because when you're old every letter feels like bad news. The letter said violation. Violation for what? Overgrown grass. Eleanor stepped outside right then, looked at her yard. Grass was maybe half an inch taller than usual. Arizona heat had slowed her mower down. Her knees didn't bend like they used to. She thought surely this was a mistake, so she called the number straight to voicemail. She left a message, soft voice, polite, apologizing for something she didn't even understand. 3 days later, another letter. This one came with a fine, $100. That money was groceries, medicine, electric bill. She called again, no answer. Another week passed, another letter, another fine, $200. Now that's when the panic set in. Eleanor started waking up at night, heart racing, hands cold, mind spinning. She cut the grass herself, took breaks every few minutes, sweat dripping, legs shaking. Neighbors drove by, windows rolled up, eyes forward. No one stopped, no one asked. She thought it was over. It wasn't. The HOA inspector came next, clipboard, sunglasses, didn't even say hello. He circled her house like a shark, marked things down, paint fading, mailbox leaning, trash bin visible from the street. Eleanor stood there clutching her sweater, trying to explain, trying to breathe. He said, "Ma'am, I'm just doing my job." That phrase, it always comes right before someone ruins your life. Another letter, another fine, $300, then 5 late fees stacked, interest added. She went down to the HOA office, sat in the lobby for 2 hours. When they finally called her in, they talked to her like she was a child, like she was stupid, like she was already guilty. One board member laughed when she mentioned her husband built that fence himself. Another said, rules are rules. That night she cried in her kitchen, lights off, hands wrapped around a cold mug of tea. She thought about selling. Where would she go? Who would buy an old house with violations? She thought about Frank, how he promised she'd always be safe in that house. Then came the letter that changed everything. Final notice that means they could legally take her home. 74 years old, widowed, about to lose the only thing she had left. And here's where things get real messed up, because what Eleanor didn't know, what nobody told her, was that the HOA had already been targeting seniors, widows, people who couldn't fight back, homes they could snatch, cheap, flip, later profit quietly. And Eleanor's house, corner lot, prime location, was next. She sat at her kitchen table staring at that letter, hands shaking so bad she couldn't even fold it, and she whispered out loud, "I didn't do anything wrong." But the HOA wasn't done, not even close, because the next move they made would drag this quiet widow into a fight that would shock the entire country. And trust me, America wasn't ready for what came next. You think the worst thing that can happen is getting scared? Nah, the real nightmare starts when fear turns into pressure because once that lien notice hit Eleanor's table, everything changed. She stopped sleeping, stopped eating right. Every knock on the door felt like eviction. Every car slowing down outside made her heart jump. She started keeping the lights off at night, like that would somehow make her invisible, but the HOA wasn't slowing down, they were speeding up. Another letter came, certified mail, cold language, legal words meant to confuse and scare. It said failure to comply would result in foreclosure proceedings. Foreclosure, a word Eleanor had only heard on the news. Now it was sitting in her living room. She went back to the HOA office. This time she brought paperwork, receipts, photos. She stood there waiting, watching young couples walk in, laughing, watching board members sip coffee. When it was her turn, they barely looked at her. One of them said, "Ma'am, you should have addressed these issues earlier." Another said, "Ignorance of the rules is not an excuse." She tried to speak, her voice cracked. "I live alone, am doing my best." The room went quiet. Then the HOA president leaned back in his chair, smirked, and said, "Maybe this neighborhood isn't a good fit for you anymore." That sentence hit harder than any fine. That night Eleanor called her daughter in Ohio. Didn't want to sound weak, but she broke down, cried, said she might lose the house. Her daughter promised to help, but help takes time, and time was something Eleanor didn't have. Days later the fines crossed $2,000. $2,000 for grass paint, a mailbox. Then something ugly happened. A notice was taped to her front door, public bright red, violation pending legal action. That's when the whispers started. People stopped waving, stopped smiling. One neighbor quietly told her, "They're doing this to old folks. You ain't the first." That night Eleanor packed a small bag just in case, and right when it felt like she was completely alone, a stranger knocked on her door, a young man with a camera and a local news badge. He said, "Ma'am, we got a tip about what the HOA is doing to you." And that moment was the spark that set this whole thing on fire, because once the cameras turned on, America started paying attention. The reporter didn't come in yelling, didn't come in swinging. He just let Eleanor talk. And when a 74-year-old widow looks straight into a camera, eyes tired, voice shaking, and says, "They're trying to take my home." People listen. That clip aired that night, local news, 6 o'clock. By midnight it was everywhere: Facebook, X, TikTok, YouTube. People sharing it with captions like, "This could be my mom, this could be my grandma, this is straight up evil." And just like that, Cedar Grove HOA went from quiet power players to public enemy number one. Phones started ringing at the HOA office, emails flooding in, voicemails stacked, not from lawyers, not from homeowners, from strangers, regular folks, angry folks, some polite, some not. And the HOA board, they panicked. The president called an emergency meeting, closed doors, raised voices. They blamed the inspector, blamed the management company, blamed Eleanor, said she exaggerated, said the media twisted the facts. They released a statement, cold corporate, saying they were simply enforcing community standards. That statement made things worse, because America hates one thing more than bullies. Bullies who hide behind paperwork. Donations started showing up for Eleanor: $5, $10, hundreds. A GoFundMe hit 20 grand in 2 days. People wrote letters, sent cards, some with prayers, some with threats aimed at the HOA. Eleanor
This
sat at her
decision is
kitchen
final.
table, opening
We cannot
envelopes,
afford any
hands
further
shaking,
delays.
crying, smiling. For the first time in months she didn't feel invisible. But hey, race the part nobody saw coming. The reporter got another call, different widow, different state, same HOA management company, then another and another, same pattern, same fines, same pressure. That's when the story cracked wide open. National outlets
This decision
picked it
is
up,
final.
cable news, morning
We cannot
shows,
afford
even
any further
late-night
delays.
hosts cracking jokes about HOAs gone wild. And when the spotlight gets that bright, secrets don't stay hidden. A former HOA board member came forward off the record. At first said this wasn't about grass, wasn't about paint, it was about money, cheap foreclosures, quick flips, quiet profits. They knew seniors couldn't fight, didn't have lawyers, didn't have energy. They counted on fear, and now that fear had flipped midway through the week, the HOA's attorney reached out to Eleanor. Different tone now, respectful. Careful said they were willing to pause enforcement, reconsider fines. Eleanor didn't answer right away, because once you've been pushed that far you don't trust sudden kindness. Here is the rehoop.
Please,
because
I need
right
this
when
story.
it felt
No, you have to leave now.
Just a few
like
questions,
the
it's important.
HOA
I
was
said
backing
no.
down, they pulled one last dirty move. They filed the foreclosure paperwork anyway, quietly behind the scenes, and when that leaked to the press, all hell broke loose. Protesters showed up outside the HOA office, signs, cameras, chants. Politicians started tweeting calling for investigations, and Eleanor, the quiet widow they thought would fold, stood on her porch, looked into a sea of cameras, and said, "I'm not going anywhere." And that one sentence is what pushed this story into history, because now it wasn't just about her house, it was about how far power could go, and how hard America would push back, and in the final chapter someone was about to lose.
Must prevail.
Everything you know, it's serious when the bullies stop talking, when the emails go quiet, when lawyers start choosing their words real careful, because by the time Eleanor Watkins walked into that courtroom, this wasn't just her fight anymore, this was America watching to see who really had power. The HOA showed up dressed sharp, expensive suits, legal team stacked like a wall. Eleanor showed up with one lawyer borrowed jacket, hands folded back straight. She didn't look scared, she looked tired and